My name is Nat. Today, I'm going to be your host. Today, we are talking about mental health, but it does relate to neurodivergence. It relates to it in the way that if you live with something which means you think differently to the norm, it's going to make other things more challenging and it can put unnecessary pressure on your mental well-being. I've managed my social anxiety for a while, had cognitive behavioral therapy, but I didn't find it completely effective on its own. We've talked about it quite a lot, actually, how cognitive behavioral therapy isn't actually tailored to neurodivergent, quite often doesn't work that well. For me personally, I do know it does work for some people, and it is the best we've got at the moment, unless you've got like real specialists. I discovered my neurodivergence, and I think I know why I have to struggle so much with other areas of life and where my CBT couldn't solve this. Here's our lovely team again. You got me today, and you've got April. Our last webinar that we have edited and uploaded is the history of DCD, as it's also known as. Social anxiety 101. What are the basics? How does it relate to general anxiety? Because we've got, this is SAD, social anxiety disorder, but we also had general anxiety disorder. We are going to be talking about both types because we've got social anxiety and agoraphobia, which is more about like leaving the house in a nutshell. Also stands for seasonal affective disorder. Yes, SAD does have multiple meanings, April. Thanks for pointing that one out. Today, we're going to be discussing social anxiety and agoraphobia, how they relate very heavily. We're going to be looking at physical and mental symptoms. It's not just a mental thing, it's also physical. Sweating, heart palpitations, it can affect you in many different ways. But we're also going to look at how common these things are. Is this something which is normal? Is it something that unnormal? We all get depressed, but not all of us have depression. The same, we all get anxious, but not all of us have an anxiety disorder. My first question to all of you is, what even is social anxiety? We need to define it. What do you think actually counts? Is this kind of not wanting to go hang out with your friends on a Friday? Or is it a little bit more than that? How extreme does it have to be to count? When is it a disorder? And when is it not a disorder? A sense of dread and being in the company of other people. Yes, but I would say it's more than that, because if you are, say, in the company of a bunch of vampires, you're probably going to get a little bit anxious because they're bloody vampires. But that makes sense. If you're in the company of, say, your friends or people who mean you no harm and you still feel really anxious, maybe that's a disorder. It's the same thing with like depression. If someone dies in your life and you're sad, that's normal. If you are sad all the time, even when there's no reason to be sad, that's when you might want to look into it. Being afraid to communicate with others and not wanting to go out. Not wanting to go out is more the agoraphobia side, but definitely it's sometimes it's that unrational fear that doesn't really make sense. It's that we've got that internal fight or flight response always kicking into overdrive when it has no reason to be doing so. Intense fight or flight, even at the thought of being with other people, sometimes hyperventilating a lot. Normally, if we see a cheetah, we're like, better run, time to get a bit nervous. But this is, you see a cute little cat, let's get nervous. The body is overreacting to a threat that isn't actually real. The threat might not be real, but your reactions are definitely real. One of the biggest misconceptions about mental health is that people think that it's all in your head. No, it's a real thing. Your heart is really pumping. Rumination and ritualistic thinking, OCD, before and after interactions, feeling that something bad is going to happen in a crowded place, being anxious and afraid to communicate with other people. A quote when it comes to anxiety says, anxiety is an unpleasant, negative emotional state. It is a specific emotional state which consists of unpleasant, consciously, you're aware of it, perceived feelings. Perceived is an interesting word. It's like that's how you see it, maybe not how other people see it, of nervousness, tension. Remember, tension is a very physical thing. Nervousness, mental, tension, physical, and apprehension. Should I do it? Should I not? Associated activation of arousal, of automotive nervous system. What this is saying is this is very much physical and mental. It's both. Our arousal system is looking, when those meerkats are always like looking for danger. It's like our brains are doing that even though it probably doesn't need to be. It's over precautious to the point that it interferes with day-to-day life. Yet your mind has a tendency to overthink. It's like you should have relaxed ages ago. Another misconception is, when you're on a treadmill and you're on it for too long, you get exhausted. You get off the treadmill. Our mind is very much the same. If we're thinking, that's fine. But if we're overthinking, it's like we're on a treadmill and we need to get off. But if we don't get off, it's going to make us exhausted. Mental health and physical health really aren't that different. How does anxiety affect you? When you get anxious, is this something that comes and goes? Or is it something which is debilitating that you're not even able to concentrate, breathe, function in day-to-day life? Okay, a lot of you have gone in the middle. Some of you have gone extreme fear. The key thing to know here is that if it's occasional, that's normal. We are meant to, if you're using inside out, being anxious is normal. Without anxiety, we would have been eaten by all the cats. So we need to be anxious. But it's when it's extreme and when it stops you from being the best version of you, when your body is kicking it into overdrive, when you hadn't even asked it to. I say if you're in the middle, you're in the safe area. If it comes into the extreme fear that is prolonged, that's when we might want to look at some support. I honestly get nervous leaving my house, except to go to another country. Do you know what? I would say the reason for that is more social anxiety, because if you're just scared of the outdoors, that would affect you anywhere. Genuinely, when I go out in London, I have no fear. I'm like, freedom, even though it's dangerous. But when I'm in my little small town in Southampton, I do get anxious. I think it's because I know everyone. I'm more likely to bump into a chat. And some days I just don't want to chat with people. I do see how that could have happened. April says 2 years ago, I probably would have been somewhere in the middle of the scale because my anxiety was bad then. Nowadays, I only get anxious occasionally. If it's occasionally, that's perfectly normal. If it's to the point where it's interfering, that's when we might have an issue. What mental state do you feel when anxious? Would you say you feel really fearful, really at unease? And I want you to essentially rank yourself, because depending on how you feel, you might get a different diagnosis. When you say you're anxious and I say you're anxious, or someone else says they're anxious, we very well may be talking about a completely different thing. Okay, so we've got fear. A lot of you feel at unease, repetitive negative behavior, difficulty concentrating, confusion. Quite an interesting one. When you don't feel yourself. As you can see, it can affect people in many different ways. Do you feel an anxious person, or does it seem like it's something which is following you along, which isn't you? Because some people are just anxious. Some people are just the naturally anxious people. But if you're someone who says, that's not me, even though I'm feeling it all the time, that's again something we look into. April says, when I'm anxious these days, I tend to replay negative thoughts in my head and find it hard to concentrate. Our brain, let's put a plaster on this. With mental health, it's the same. Our brain in some way has been damaged, and it wants us to look after ourselves and fix us. When our brain is overdoing it, it's like trying to fix it. Sometimes it can go over the top again. The brain's not great at moderation, and it does tend to go a bit overboard. Let's look at some physical symptoms of anxiety. Which ones of these do you feel? Do you sometimes get a churning in your stomach, that kind of butterfly feeling? Do you feel light and dizzy? And sometimes a bit loose for breath? Does your feeling go a bit numb and you get pins and needles? Do you get a little bit restless and you wiggle about too much? Do you get aches and pains everywhere, like muscle tenderness? Do you start breathing really fast? And do you think your heartbeat is being a little bit irregular? These are all very common characteristics of anxiety. This is an absolute reaction to what your body perceives as danger. Whenever I used to get extreme panic attacks from my social anxiety, I didn't have the best reaction from some of my family who perceived it as anger. It was difficult to explain that I was in extreme fear and pain. That is a massive lack of empathy on their behalf. They think I don't feel that way due to this stimuli. What you're feeling is unreasonable and makes no sense. That is typically what happens with anyone with mental health and someone with good mental health. People just put themselves in their own shoes and say, I'm looking at this. I have no emotional response to this. Why are you not having the same response as me? Getting angry and irritable is, imagine you want to leave your house, but someone's bricked up the door and you can't leave. You're going to get angry. With anxiety, you want to go out and live your best life, but your brain has kind of bricked up the wall in order to allow you to do that. Of course, you're going to get upset. It's very natural. It'd be weird if you didn't get upset. People sometimes see you as acting out. Hey, I know it's easy to say it's them, but it really is. The more empathy we have for people, the better. It doesn't mean we all have to experience the same thing, but I'm sure we've all experienced something to a similar place at some time or another. All right. Ooh, what is a cardiovascular symptom? Is it discomfort over the heart? Is it difficulty in breathing? Or is it nausea? Essentially, is it to do with the old ticker? Is it to do with your lungs? Or is it to feel like you're going to vomit? Which one is it? Discomfort in the heart. It's when the heart is beating irregular. Typically, your heart is going like, but if your heart is like beating out of sync, that could be it. It's because the brain is like not knowing how to regulate effectively. Yeah, Robert, absolutely heart. This is a very common effect of anxiety, social or otherwise. Dry mouth, difficulty in swallowing, butterflies in the stomach belong to what group? God, this is really tiny font. I apologize. We've got, first one is neurological. Then we got read them yourself. Okay, I can't read these.
Neurological.
Gastrointestinal. These are, when people say, oh, that's a side effect, very common. Having anxiety does give you a dry mouth. It does make it difficult to swallow. It affects your body physical. Free. Are they not neurological symptoms though? Everything stems from the brain, but these are automated from the gut area. What is not a symptom of social anxiety? This is where we get on the difference between generalized anxiety and social anxiety, because general anxiety, basically everything's fair game. Every sort of expression you have could be related to anxiety. Excessive worry, absolutely. Sweating, absolutely. Blurred vision, believe it, absolutely. Lack of libido. That's why I put the little eggplant there. That also part of anxiety. Fear of social situations, part of general anxiety. But when we look at social anxiety, we are getting a lot more narrower. Typically, you do excessively worry. You do have a very physical response. If it's something that you internally feel, more general. If it's something that happens as a result of being with people, more social. That's why blurred vision, maybe not so much. Aman absolutely smashed it. Simba, a very respectable second. Very nice. Anxiety has many different effects. We talked about how it can affect physical and mental, but what about even more? It can affect your psyche. So all the internal processing, your mental state, it can affect behavioral changes. This is why you don't feel like yourself and that you get this kind of disassociatedness. It's why when you go to parties or to meet people say, oh, you're so quiet. And you're like, I'm not quiet. Once you get to know me, I'm completely different. Because when you're in a situation you feel comfortable with, your body is putting up all its defense mechanisms. And of course, you're not going to be as approachable. I like to think of it like a knight in his armor. Imagine when he's got no armor on, he's at the pub, he's chilling. What a cuddly person. When he's got all the armor on, ready to battle, very cuddly. You probably wouldn't get much of a conversation out of that night. When we're struggling from anxiety, we put all our armor on and it prepares us for one thing, but it makes us less effective in other things, i.e. being ourselves. It affects people in very different ways. So some of the components, we're like building anxiety up like Lego bricks. We've got verbal descriptions, we've got psychological responses, and we've also got behavioral response. This is like a triad. Anxiety comes as a result of it when these things aren't effective. Without sounding all doom and gloom, there are benefits to everything. What are the benefits of social anxiety? We normally relate benefits to neurodivergent conditions because that's what we always say. Neurodivergent things are disabling by society and not inherently a disability. In the right context, there are many benefits associated with being neurodivergent. What about mental health? Does mental health have to, in its very nature, be negative, or are there still silver linings to this as well? Without any anxiety, you'd be stepping in strangers' cars every 5 seconds. I got in a stranger's car because they got lost. They had Alzheimer's and they were driving and they shouldn't have been. So I got them home safely, which was me doing a good citizen thing, but also incredibly dumb. I clearly don't have much anxiety, and that put me at risk. A lot of people with autism, particularly children, don't have much anxiety when they're young, hence why they're very likely to get abducted. Anxiety is good. Resilience. When you overcome challenges, you get stronger. You get a natural armor rather than having to put on an artificial armor. Self-awareness, you know yourself more, exposure to challenges, keeps you safe. We wouldn't ever want to completely get rid of anxiety because it is a good thing in moderation. Every single thing is good in moderation. Chocolate and sweets, good in moderation. Even apples, good in moderation. So anxiety is completely natural. It's just when we go too far down that rabbit hole. And I will say media, TV it wants us to be anxious because anxious gets a response. So when you watch TV, you're like the news, oh no, that's bad. Then the next one, oh, that's bad. Oh no, like when do you ever watch the news and be like, today's been a good day. Just nothing bad happened today. Never going to happen. So you've always got to think the reasons why we get anxious is media is quite often manipulating us. And over a prolonged period of time of exposure to negativity, it can become ingrained in you where you come to expect negativity. Judging by everything I've learned recently, there should be a terrorist attack any second now. Our brains start to expect it. Do you know what, Emma? I agree with you. I've stopped watching the news as much. I still watch like different news channels on YouTube, but they're a bit more selective to like kind of science or research or news. I know some of you might like to keep up to date with current affairs, and I completely respect that. But if you're someone who naturally is quite anxious, maybe I'd avoid it or at least minimize it. What about all the other anxieties disorders? There are so many to choose from. Which one will I'm going to have today? So anxiety is like an umbrella term. Anxiety disorder, also umbrella term. Then within that, we have lots of different ones. This was taken from the DSM, the Diagnostical Statistical Manual of Mental Health Disorders, Volume 5, and that's all their little kind of corresponding numbers. I also get anxiety from bloody Amazon. They ordered a package yesterday, flipping prime delivery, same day delivery, didn't turn up. I was at the house all day. What happens if the package turns up? Didn't turn up. Then it says it will come tomorrow, but it's saying it's coming today. We got agoraphobia, which we'll talk about all these in a second. Panic disorder, specific phobias. These are like spiders, oranges, or whatever scares you. Social phobias, that is basically the exact same as social anxiety disorder, interchangeable. Generalized anxiety disorder, the most common. Then we've got substance and medical induced. Drugs are going to give you anxiety. Anxiety disorder due to other medical conditions, basically other. So the top ones are the most common. The other ones is when we're not overly sure or you don't fit neatly into a tiny box. Let's have a look at some of them. Agoraphobia is a fear or difficulty to escape places, avoiding public areas. On the extreme side, never leaving your house. On another area, maybe you don't go down certain roads or shops. We all live in towns, or some of us probably do. There's always a certain area where you're like, I shouldn't go there. Someone's going to mug me. And that is a reasonable response. Some areas are dangerous. But if you feel that response in all areas, that's not going to be great. Panic disorder is recurring or recurrent unexpected panic attacks. If you're walking down the road, no ogre, and you're still having a panic attack, that's a disorder because it doesn't make sense. It's not a rational response to the stimuli that you've been fed. Specific phobia, this is anytime someone is afraid of a typical thing. Honestly, the phobias can be for anything. Water, spiders, snakes, death, lights, anything. Very normal. A lot of the time, I don't want to get in an aeroplane. It's going to fall out of the sky. Statistically, ridiculously safe. You get in a car, that's dangerous. But no one's scared of getting in a car. I don't get an Uber and think, oh, I don't know about this. I get on a plane and I'm holding on for dear life. Our brains are irrational a lot of the time. Social anxiety, that's essentially what we're talking about today. For a form of social or performance situation. So it could also be not just people. Generalized anxiety is multifaceted worry. There's more to you than just standard anxiety, but it's chronic. It affects you very deeply, debilitatingly. It might stop you from working or maintaining a relationship. Substance-induced anxiety, this could be from going cold turkey, coming off of the sauce. It can definitely happen. Anxiety from another thing. And the last one is, we have no idea why you're so anxious. We also got obsessive compulsive disorder, OCD, which sometimes is neurodivergent, sometimes it's mental health. I guess it depends how it affects you. but that is also a type of anxiety. The OCD keeps jumping ship depending on what diagnostic criteria booklet you use over the years. PTSD, long-term effects after a traumatic event. So this is when at a time when something bad happened, it was completely reasonable to be anxious. After that instance has long since passed, you continue to be anxious. It's when something bad happens to us, we do naturally learn. We're like, if something bad happened to me, if I got mugged in this alleyway, I'm not going to go down that alleyway again. But over time, it should start to ease out. But if you still get horrific trauma every time you go down that alleyway, that's when it could be a disorder, because our brains naturally learn. When something happens, we get a flood of chemicals in our brains and it rewires our neurons and connects synapses. And some things have a much greater impact or will kill other kind of brain connections, which make one connection stronger or like the only default path. Wouldn't that everything else also fall under GLAD? So GLAD, I think that is a good one, Vicky. I think you're right. We're glad it is a general. We know what it is. It's just broad. Do you have broad anxiety? Like a little bit of everything makes you anxious. But with the I don't know what it is, we don't know what that thing is. So just because something is broad doesn't mean we don't know what it is. It just means that the amount of things that might potentially be triggering is a lot greater. Acute stress, short-term anxiety post-trauma. I guess that means short-term, so hopefully it goes away after a while. But there are many different types of anxiety disorders. How do we even sort them out in different categories? First of all, it's useful because if we know what type of anxiety, we know how to support someone. Triggers, first of all, is it internal or external? So is it anxiety which is happening inside your old noggin and there isn't any kind of initial thing that kind of triggers it? Or is it external, which means when something happens, I don't know, an explosion, a loud bang, then that is beyond your control. Then we want to look at the symptoms profile. When I ask you to rate your skill set, like how is this anxiety affecting you? Depending on your profile will also determine what one you have. Then you want to look at fears. What is the actual triggers? Is it something in particular? Is it more general? Is it unknown? And then we've got behavior. So you got anxiety, but what does it actually look like in life? Because as we said, having anxiety is normal, but if the way it affects you is debilitating to day life, that's not so good. So these four things will help a practitioner be able to say what they believe you have. And it doesn't tell you everything, but it does give a starting point for a more detailed conversation. So what I want you to do is look at the range of external and internal triggers. So for instance, do you have post-traumatic distress when you've had something negative happen to you and you're not able to overcome it? Are there phobias? Are there particular things like a spider that you're terrified of? Generalized anxiety disorder, do you find that you're not really able to pinpoint it, but it's a bit of an all-rounder? Panic disorder, is that when you overreact, when there is actually something to be a bit scared about? So again, tarantula, fair enough. A tiny little money spider, they're not going to hurt you. Obsessive compulsive disorder, again, there are lots of things that we'd look at. Strokes can actually impact you in many different ways. There's a thing called acquired neurodivergence, where you can get like acquired autism or acquired ADHD, which is not quite it, but it looks very similar. Now, let's have a look at social anxiety versus agoraphobia, because these two, they're quite similar, but there are differences. Remember, one is seeing people, one might be leaving a place, like going out into the world. Just to clarify, social anxiety symptoms can usually be observed by people. That's an interesting one. People can see it. Agoraphobia is symptoms connected with a feeling of unsteady, unsafe when away from the house. So which one of these are things that other people see, and which are ones which happen if you are away from your safe place? So blushing is yet very much a physical response, which people can visibly see. Twitching in the muscles, breathlessness, dizziness. If I left the house and there's nobody around and I'm completely on my own and I still feel really anxious, agoraphobia. If you have left the house and you're currently fine, maybe it's social anxiety, you only get anxiousness when you see someone or when you're expecting to see someone. If you are in the middle of nowhere and you know you are not going to see anyone, you won't have the social anxiety. So in a nutshell, the differences are for social anxiety is being introduced to visitors. So anytime you meet someone with authority figures like police, medics, teachers, bosses, I get anxiety when I'm shopping and I'm bagging stuff because I'm like, they know I'm really slow. Public speaking, being teased, unfamiliar places. So maybe you go outside your town. I know for my mum, she does not ever leave our town because she just hates it. Crossing streets, public transport. Public transport is a real big one. A lot of people get this on the London Underground, department stores. So hopefully you start to build up a picture on what is one and what is the other. Now, it can be the love of being alone. My heart beats fast when I'm playing a pool match. Well, that's normal because your body is getting adrenaline. The more adrenaline you have, the more hyper focus. So that's normal. Eastleigh is a good place to stay. Nice and safe on the whole. I will run away with my change in hand due to taking too long. It's interesting how the body affects itself. On here, I want you to select which ones are associated with social anxiety opposed to agoraphobia. I keep wanting to say like Agrabah from like Aladdin, but so what we got: fear of panic attack, fear of loss of control, fear of non-social stimulation. Remember the differences. Okay, enter. Let's have a look what we got here. We've got fear of a panic attack, fear of loss of control, social, fear of non-social, stimulate alone, fear of humiliation. I'd say a lot that these first ones are, I don't know, it's like tiny. I just hate people. That's so sad. I hate bad people. There's some nice people out there. This will be an interesting one. What is prevalent? So sometimes you're not sure what's going on with your head. You can look at statistics. So on here, I want you just to rank prevalence, how likely something is. And this was done from a relatively recent study. So it's quite a respected study. Which of these conditions is ranked more heavily? There's nothing wrong with liking alone time. I think, again, that's a kind of a neurotypical expectation that we assume that if you don't like being with people, there must be something wrong. There's a difference between liking something and doing something because there is a fear that is telling you that's the best option. For me, I'm 50-50. I like people, but I also equally like my own time. Probably maybe 60-40 from liking my own space to other people's. I do need a little bit of everything. Okay, what we got here? Let's actually see what the right answers are. So, social anxiety disorder, the like more generic one, got the most one. I know what you're saying. That's the umbrella term. Like, why is that there? It's because of data. People just gave a generic answer. Not surprising, that's the most common. Specific phobias. So the next one that is most common is people who are scared of a particular thing unnecessarily, like snakes, spiders, heights, that type of thing. 22.7 million people across the EU. Eeks. This would have included us at the time in the UK. Social anxiety disorder is the third most prevalent, or the second, depending how you look at it. Then we've got agoraphobia, GAD, panic disorder, post-traumatic stress disorder, and lastly, obsessive compulsive disorder with the least amount of individuals. That's why I only included the highlights. What did we learn today? Hopefully we learned a few things. We learned that there are many different types of anxiety, and it comes in very different forms. We noticed that social anxiety and agoraphobia are different conditions, and they can affect you in different ways, even though people get them confused quite a lot. We notice that symptoms are not just mental, they are also physical, and they are very real. This isn't something you're making up, it's a real response. We also know that it's incredibly common. Millions of people, double-digit millions, that suffer from anxiety. If any of you are struggling with anxiety, please do seek support. Today was more of a general information about it, more of a sciencey angle, but there is help. From a UK perspective, just because that's where I'm from, this is what I know, you can go to your GP. Now, what you can do is go to the NHS IAPT. And if you're not sure what this is, essentially you can refer yourself for cognitive behavioral therapy and different support. It's free to do, anyone can do it, and you don't need a referral. Don't get me wrong, it takes forever, and it's not that well suited to neurodivergent people, but at least we have it. You've also got organizations, charities like Mind, Anxiety UK, No Panic. They are a great resource, much more specialized in this area than, say, Exceptional Individuals. Online resources, Togetherall is a nice site, which is worth checking out, and Social Anxiety UK. You can go private, where you can look at, or you BACP or UKCP, and this is where you can find therapists that are legit and credible rather than going to the Wild West. I don't know what any of your thoughts are on platforms like BetterHelp. I don't know if any of your experience, but I've noticed there's been quite a lot of backlash on YouTube lately. A lot of people are saying it's not good. There's been some cowboys on it.
The data breaches, apparently, they're not complying with GDPR and stuff. I think a lot of it is that they're apparently using the data. They're selling the data.
That's a shame because the concept I really like, affordable therapy. But unfortunately, I haven't heard many good things about it. So I can't personally recommend it. You've also got helplines like the Samaritans. A lot of people think the Samaritans should only be called if you're like suicidal. No, you can call them for many different reasons. If you're feeling anxious and you just want someone to talk to, someone to calm you down, they are a great resource. And volunteers, they're very empathetic and they always answer. It's definitely worth checking out. If you do have severe anxiety, social or otherwise, you can access support in the workplace. We always talk about access to work, government grant. You can go on our website to learn more about it, but that would also be covered under the Equality Act. We're going to be looking at the geography of dyspraxia. Dyspraxia is a motor coordination condition. It is a neurodevelopmental one, and it is as well known as dyslexia, despite being really prominent. We're going to be looking at how do other cultures look at dyspraxia? Where is it most prominent? Why are some countries not talking about it? How are some countries diagnosing and other people are not? What's the stigma attached to it? Who's this? Okay, I know this guy. He is a very famous photographer with dyspraxia.
David Bailey?
Yes, this is meant to be Bailey. You can also subscribe to our YouTube channel if you want to watch this later on. Just click subscribe. And we upload normally within a week or so. You can see all our lovely webinars. Here's our contact details if you do want to get in contact. But as always, everyone, thank you so much for attending. It's always fantastic to interact with all of you. I love doing these webinars. If you do have any ideas for future ones, do let me know and have a lovely rest of your Thursday.